talk to you today about predators. As I was preparing this, I'm half hoarder, okay, half. All of my academic materials from my college career, especially my biology classes and my grad school classes, I still have. So I went through many of my old ecology lectures and was having, great shades of throwbacks. So even though they're not here, Dr. Capers and Dr. Fox and my TA, Ben Bainbridge, kind of helped start this passion for biology and ecology. Sometimes all it takes is one class or one experience to get you interested, and it doesn't mean it has to be your major, right? It just means that it's something that you are interested in, okay? So we're going to talk about predators, and as I mentioned, I was looking back through ecology lectures. So when scientists look at ecosystems, it's really one of the hardest things to study and to nail down. So when we get to, and I know you guys all want to talk about the wolves, when we get to the wolves, think about the complexity that's going to go into this, and how long it's actually going to take to study whole ecological systems. So one part of the complexity when we look at ecology is we study both the living and the non-living parts of the environment. So we're looking at the plants, we're looking at the soil content, we're looking at the climate, weather patterns, climate change. We're looking at introduced species, native species, things that are decomposing other species. And part of that study is to look at the relationships between those and see how things change when something is altered. Okay? It really takes this thermodynamic approach. How many of you guys are familiar with the laws of thermodynamics? Kind of, sort of? Colby, what's the first one?
Energy can be created or destroyed by the transfer.
Energy cannot be created or destroyed, but it can be transferred. And that transfer, how much energy and nutrients cycle through an ecosystem, is one of the things we look at in ecology. You know the second one? Okay, anybody know second law? Okay, Colby.
It's basically things get more messy or cluttered unless the force and component declutters or fixes.
Okay, so Colby's right. Essentially, the second law of thermodynamics says that things go from order to disorder. Okay, there's this increasing, it's kind of like a ball rolling downhill. It's going to keep going until it gets to the bottom, unless someone stands in front of it and tries to stop it and applies energy. Okay, so that's what we see when we look at ecosystems. We do have this continual input of energy, particularly in the systems I'm going to talk about today, which is the sun. Okay, so thermal energy. We look at rates of flow, so how fast energy and nutrients flow through an ecosystem, and also cycling. I'm not going to talk about it today, but a big part of looking at ecosystems is looking at the cycle like the water cycle or the nitrogen cycle, carbon cycle, things that will both be in the living and the non-living parts of the environment. And then how efficient that transfer is. We're going to touch on this efficiency of transfer and relationships and our energy levels in what I'm going to talk about today. So in general, when we look at ecology, we can look at two different systems that each have their own initial food source. Okay, so a production energy system, and that's what we're going to focus on today, but there's also a decomposition system where the input for that is dead organic matter and poop. Okay, that one we're not going to talk about today, even though talking about poop is oh so exciting. We are going to talk about production. So I debated, as you're going to see later, I have a lot of graphs on here, and so I figured I should not overwhelm you by also putting math on the board. Sorry, Stacy. I'll tell you what the math is, but I won't put it on the board. So net primary productivity is essentially the amount of plant energy that's available for an herbivore to eat. Okay? And this comes from a calculation that actually has, you guys have heard of, if you've had economics or business, like, you know, gross versus net. It's the same idea. So gross primary productivity is all of the plant material that's there, or all the energy that they have, but they have to use some of that energy to do respiration and to grow and to produce offspring. So this is technically GPP minus R, but again, didn't want to throw too many equations at you. Not numbers, just equations. So. But what we talk about when we talk about net primary productivity is we can look at how different types of ecosystems are based on their net primary productivity. So tropical rainforests, super productive. Lots of plant material available. Where we are in the desert and the high mountain area, not so much. So we better be pretty damn efficient with our plant materials. Okay, that's really, really important. So what is the fate of this production? Okay, particularly the production of food material by plants. Which, by the way, let's talk about this. Do plants want to be eaten? Absolutely not. But that's another lecture. Maybe we can do plants and herbivores next semester.
Back it down.
Okay. So we have, when we look at ecosystems, a very simple way of looking at energy transfers through what we call trophic levels. Trophic refers to feeding. So these are the different ways that organisms get their food. So our plants are producers. The things that eat the plants are herbivores. The things that eat the herbivores are primary carnivores. And then sometimes we have a top carnivore. Some different vocabulary we'll look at in a little bit. These herbivores also get called primary consumers because they're going to be consuming the producers. And these guys get called secondary consumers. These guys get called tertiary consumers. But the big take home from this information is that the size of these squares is in relation to how much energy there is. Okay? So you'll notice a really big number and really big square for our producers, but not so much on the top carnivore. And this is because of that law of thermodynamics, where energy is lost, and I shouldn't say lost, energy is transformed into heat, and that heat is not a usable form of energy for these living organisms. So there's this decrease of energy at each level. And we have, and these numbers don't reflect it exactly, but there's a general rule that they call the 10% rule. Generally, at each successive step up the little pyramid, okay, there's 10% left to work with, and then 10% of that, and then 10% of that. Since I like to be interactive, I will let you ponder this for a second, okay? People have to eat things, yeah. Do you think it's more efficient for people to be vegetarian or omnivorous or carnivorous?
Depends on the person.
Any guess? It depends on the person. Yes, nutritional value, etc. What I'm really thinking about is the amount of energy that's available. So imagine if this is corn, and this is cows, and this is people, okay? If we were to function, as I smack my microphone, if we were to function as herbivores, there's actually more energy available at that level to feed people than when we feed the cows the corn and then we eat the cows, okay? And this is from someone who's a meat eater. I'm just telling you the ecology of the system. This is not a, soapbox of mine, okay? Meat eater every day. But that's how it works. So this energy that we have at the bottom, that net primary productivity, gets funneled through these various trophic levels. But in reality, this is what we see more often than not, okay? Food chains are really easy. Food chains are great. Super simple to understand. But in nature, 9 times out of 10, we have a more complex food web. Okay? So let me explain to you how to read these, because the first time I saw one of these in an ecology class, I nearly passed out, and I don't want that to happen to you. So you see here at the bottom, these are our primary producers. And they have an arrow going to something. So this acacia has an arrow going to the impala. That is referring to where the energy is going. So the impala is eating the acacia. Okay, so that's where the energy is going. And then the impala is eaten by the lion. The impala is eaten by, well, no, I'm trying to follow my arrows here, by the cheetah. And you can see just how complex this gets. And let me tell you that for an ecosystem, complexity is good. Okay? Complexity is good for another reason. So let's say one of these species of primary producers, let's get rid of the dung beetle. Okay? There are plenty of other primary producers to fill its job, or what we'd call filling its niche. Right? There's plenty of things to fill that spot. Okay? Now, where we sometimes get into trouble, now this is a very complex multi-carnivore system. But if you have a food web with only 1 or 2 carnivores, that can cause some trickle-down effects through the rest of the ecosystem. Okay, and we won't have that redundancy, but just a little glimpse into why studying ecology is so hard and complicated to do. Okay, lots of stuff going on. So one question, and this was raised years in 1950s, 1960s. And the question was raised, well, why are trees green? Why is the earth green? What's going on? And really, there are 2 explanations for this. And both can function at the same time, or you can have primary functions from one. But one is bottom up. Okay? So the bottom up control is the number of producers, influences the number of consumers, and so on and so forth. Now top down is where we get a little more, what I think, more interesting. Okay? The number of predators impact the number of food items. Those food items that then have a different food item, that then have a different food item. And sometimes both can be in play. Okay, but there are different ways of looking through this. And primarily, the view that I'm going to take today is the top-down, because I wanted to focus on the predators. Okay, so we're going to get the predator's point of view today. So what I have for you next is a couple of examples of effects of particular species, or on particular species, of their predators. And I'll try my best to tell you a little bit about each experiment. So this is data, this particular species of a knoll is one that lives in an island habitat, I believe. And usually they don't have predators. Okay? So what these researchers did was they introduced a predator to see if that would have any change. And what it did was change their behavior. Okay? So around, I forget the exact time, it might have been October, but sometime after April 1966, these larger lizard predators were introduced to this island. And they found that these anoles would be found at higher and higher heights in the trees, and that the limbs they were on were smaller and smaller in diameter. So the presence of the predator was affecting their behavior. They tried to escape the predator. A smart idea, right? So that is just one way predators can affect their prey. They can alter their behavior, which is really, really interesting. So when I was looking through this, I thought this was really, really neat. So this is a graph that shows the herbivore weight in kilogram, and this is a log function. So, Stacy, if I get this wrong, I'm going to be really, really sad. Our one number is like having 10 to the first power. Our two number is like having 10 to the second power, so 10 times 10 is 100, and so on and so forth. So 1,000, 10,000. And then this was the amount of predation that was responsible for the death of those organisms. Okay? So a variety of different types of organisms, the oribi, impali, topi, and this is from the African Serengeti. And so what they found was the smallest predators, the smallest prey items were 100% of their mortality was from predation. And the same for these bigger guys, the black rhino, the hippo, and the African elephant. 100% of their deaths were not caused by predation. Okay, and you see this nice little curve. Okay, it's not exactly linear, but you see this curve is as we get bigger, they are less and less of a prey item. Okay, so predators choosing their prey, right? If I'm a cheetah, I'm going to go out after the teeny tiny impala. I'm not going to, try to take down an African elephant by myself. Okay? Again, behavioral, logical, what we think of as logical. And this is one of my favorite examples. So this is from a study in the Alaskan Aleutian Islands. And what was first noticed, what these researchers were first studying, were the effects of sea otters on kelp. Okay? So sea otters are a predator that eat urchins, and urchins are an herbivore that eat kelp. Okay? So what they found out when they had these sea otters, the sea otters would have a really, really strong effect on these urchins. And they'd have a really small urchin biomass. And then we'd have a really high density of kelp, right? If there's nothing to eat the kelp, then the kelp has a high density, right? You get those like trickle-down effects. And then over time, they found that there were areas that they couldn't catch any more sea otters. And they were like, what the heck is going on? Because normally they didn't have a lot of predators, and the story goes, someone told this researcher, well, maybe it's killer whales. And his response was, no, killer whales don't eat sea otters, they eat other whales. But sure enough, these killer whales were consuming sea otters. With less sea otters, we had more sea urchin biomass. With more of this biomass, they grazed more, and the kelp density went way, way down. Okay? Yeah, and you may think, well, hey, what's the big deal? It's just kelp. But this kelp, think back to the food web, right, is not just food for urchins. It's food for other things. It's habitat for other things. Okay? So that introduction of a top-tier predator affected everything below it. Now, why, and this is such a cool story, why the sea otters started eating, why the killer whales started eating the sea otters was that there were less, you can come down, it's not going to bother me. Yeah, no, you're good. Why the killer whales were eating sea otters was because in, I'm going to forget the year, and I'm always going to throw the 1950s and 1960s under the bus. There was a lot of whale hunting by humans. So we reduce the amount of food source for the killer whales, and so the killer whales have to start eating something else. So if I had been clever enough, now that I'm thinking about it, I could have drawn another graph and put people up there. Right? What happens if people start decimating killer whale populations? Right? All of these things, anything you do to an ecosystem is going to have these trickle-down effects. This is a fairly local example. This is data from Zion National Park down in Utah. And this is the effect that really, and that's why I put people up here, that people have on the cougar population, and then the cougar population have on the deer population, and then the deer population. Are you getting the gist of this? Nod heads, yes, okay. But what they found in this area where cougars were common, you see the cottonwood trees continue to increase in their density. Okay, this is cottonwood trees per kilometer. But in certain areas of the park where there was a lot of human disturbance, okay, so the touristy spots, okay, which if you have touristy spots, I'm not sure you want cougars there, but that's again besides the point. Humans come in, cougars stop hunting there. What happens then is that the deer become abundant. And after 1950, we see these missing age classes of those cottonwood trees because the deer continue to browse them. And deers like to browse on cottonwoods. They like to browse the baby trees. And these baby trees can't essentially reach maturity so that they won't get eaten on. Okay? So we see these age classes differ. This is one of those that I was talking about as everybody was coming in that I threw it at the last minute because I was like, I really like this. And it shows us this trophic cascade, and it's even got these fun arrows. You know, humans are negatively impacting the predators. Those predators would normally be consuming the deer. Okay? We can go even further and think about cottonwoods are usually found in riparian areas, so along streams. Okay? A lot of stream ecology is very specific. You don't want areas that are going to erode and streams that are going to widen. You don't want sediment to get into your streams. So if you have these cottonwoods and willows around here in this area, right, that are going to hold on to the soil, you're not going to get as much erosion. You're going to have shade. You're going to bring back the trout and the beavers and et cetera. Okay? So all of these things have really big effects. And then these researchers went on to look at the species abundance of other things, like wildflowers and amphibians and lizards. And in every case, they found out when cougars were common, there was more abundance. Right? So even though it's this predator that's going to be eating the herbivore, there were actually more species there when that cougar was there. It's pretty neat. Now mostly, I've been talking about the predator impacting the prey. This is another side of the coin where the prey can impact the predator. So this is, the prey in this case are lemmings, and the predator is the Arctic fox. So what this convoluted, confusing logistic curve graph shows you is that as the lemmings increased, so that's going up this way, the Arctic fox actually had more babies. So as the food source increased, the Arctic fox were able to survive and reproduce more, which makes sense, right? Because they're going to be eating the lemmings, right? But this number of lemmings didn't decrease so much, right? There were still plenty of them there, but it impacted the number of offspring that the predator could have, which I thought was really cool. So, what you all came to hear about. And it's not the last thing I'm going to talk about. So I do have other important things after that. So don't leave when I'm done talking about wolves. So, this is a visual representation of a trophic cascade model for our wolves. Okay, specifically for trophic cascades without wolves. Okay, if wolves are extirpated or gotten rid of, okay, then the ungulates, think elk, bison, deer, are unimpeded by predation risk. So what's going to happen to the ungulates? What's going to happen to their population numbers? They're going to increase, exactly. So if we increase the ungulates, then we increase browsing, okay? And that browsing decreases recruitment. So that recruitment of plants is what I was talking about when I said them reaching reproductive age, okay? So they don't recruit into the next age class, okay? Aspen, cottonwood, willows. I'll have aspen examples in just a minute. This riparian zone issues, and then the actual physical changes to the environment, okay? So, again, trickle-down effects. So, don't you just love these? Oh, man.
Did you make this one?
I did not. This comes from a paper that is cited right there. Yeah. No. No, ma'am. I researched zebra mussels. I did not research wolves. But I can do a fairly good literature review, so there you go. So, don't know if you know, but the Yellowstone wolf introduction is not the only time humans have thought about wolves and their impact on the environment. Now, there is an example, and it's kind of a special example because people didn't actually put them back. They came back. But people didn't do anything to stop it, so I'm still counting it as a reintroduction. The Isle Royale in Michigan. Okay, now that gets touted as really successful. The wolves did exactly what they were supposed to do. So wolves came in, and in this case, their primary food prey source was moose. So moose went down. Plant recruitment continued, and they actually saw something else that was kind of solidified the story. Years after they came back, the wolves suffered a mortality rate due to a virus. It's a dog virus, parvo, essentially, a version of the doggy virus parvo that was introduced to them by humans, by human interactions. And what they predicted, they went back down, moose went back up, and so on and so forth. So that was that's kind of touted as the nice crystal clear version. Like, oh, they did exactly what they were supposed to do. But this here is the food web for the Isle Royale species. And this is the food web for Yellowstone. A little bit more going on, right? So Yellowstone wolves were reintroduced in 1995 and 1996. They kind of did, I think they did 2 years of introductions. And that was after they were extirpated by the 1930s. So that left 65 years in between of essentially wolf-free time, okay? And they did see what they'd kind of expect to see, right? The browsing increased, you had big populations, but you also had this regular fluctuation of the prey species. So think about this. You have, or you don't have a predator, and now you have all this prey. They are still subject to population regulation by other things, like disease, right? The more individuals you have in an area, okay, think social distancing, the more likely it is that, sorry, it is what it is, the more likely a disease is to spread that through that population, right? So more individuals mean more vectors for transfer, okay? So then they decrease, but then that pressure is released, okay? So when we talk about ecological impacts, it's so complicated. And I will tell you, when I looked through this, I really found two different opinions. Yes, predators did what they thought they did, or they would have done, and maybe they did, maybe they didn't, okay? And two very, very dichotomous opinions, okay? Because it's only been, what, 1995, it's almost 2025, 30 years? Been 26 years. Thank you, almost 30 years, thank you very much. I was right, okay. That's not a really long time ecologically. That's actually only half the time they've been gone. So we have to continue these lines of research to see what's actually going on. But this was a really cool study. I thought it was really cool, where they took, and this is from Yellowstone, they took areas of Yellowstone and built exclosures. So exclosures are essentially things that exclude other things. Enclosures are designed to keep things in. Exclosures are designed to keep things out. So these exclosures were built preventing browsing. Saying the words too many times. So the number of aspen per hectare actually increased as you would predict. If you don't have browsing, this is going to increase, okay? This was actually done, speaking of things that were done close to home. Anybody know where Red River is? Is it Red River? Yeah, that's a thing, right? I'm getting the name confused. But there were some habitat restoration projects that were going on in Red River about 2016, where we put up jack fence to prevent browsing along the riparian areas, and then planted cottonwoods and willows along there, okay? So these are things that are actually being done, like, in your backyard to prevent this browsing so that we can improve that riparian zone. Also, we get more young aspen, browsing decreases, ungulate biomass decreases. Bison kind of increased, but the elk definitely decreased. Now, where these scientists get away with this, and this is where they get away with making these predictions, is that these things are correlated, right? The ungulate biomass decreases when the predator-to-prey ratio increases. But there's a lot of complexities here. You see the thing, I'm going to kind of breeze through this because I do want to have time for questions. Another example of wolf reintroduction is in Olympic National Park, and they saw similar data to that cougar experiment, where the number of trees had these missing age classes when the wolves were absent, during the time period when the wolves were absent. Okay, so maybe you did know, maybe you didn't know, but in 2020, the wolf protection given by the Endangered Species Act, the federal wolf protection given by the Endangered Species Act, was revoked. Okay, so they went to, in the lower 48 states, the gray wolf population is 6,000, so the federal government said, not our problem anymore, okay? But luckily, they do say that these will be regulated, hopefully protected by state and tribal governments, okay? So this was a big piece of very recent wolf news. Another very important piece of wolf news is that they are going to reintroduce wolves in Colorado. Now, this was a proposition that was voted on, okay, and I'm sure not everybody agrees, but they are wanting to reintroduce them to the western part of the state, the western mountainous part of the state, by 2024. Okay, so yes, they lost their protection, but they are going to reintroduce them as specifically in Colorado, hopefully in the next couple of years. Okay, back to this. We've talked a lot about these trophic cascades, but I did want to give you guys a couple more examples, and these are super cool examples, of other ways that a predator can affect.
Don't cover your eyes.
Oh, sorry. Okay, well then I won't tell. I will tell this story because it's a great story. So, just close your eyes. So this is a rough-skinned newt, and this is a common garter snake. So, oh darn it. These rough-skinned newts are poisonous, but these guys are poisonous. These guys are completely harmless.
You don't like snakes.
Those are the poisonous guys. And it's only if you eat them, so just don't eat them, okay? So these guys are poisonous, but common garter snakes can eat them. Turns out they can tolerate that toxic substance. But there's even a cooler part to this, is that they've discovered over time that some of these newts are producing more and more toxic levels of this stuff. So we call this an evolutionary arms race. So the rough-skinned newt produces a chemical. Only the garter snakes that are able to consume those newts survive to reproduce. Then they eat the ones that are palatable. And then some are born that happen to be able to make more toxin, and so on and so forth.
Not just to protect itself?
Not on purpose. It's all a random change in the DNA, all a mutation. If you happen to have it, you benefit. If you don't, you don't. It's all random. These things can't change on purpose, right? That elk that's running away from the wolf can't say, well, I better change physiologically so I'm able to outrun this wolf, right? It's what they're born with, okay? Another interesting fact is that there's another side to this story, is they've actually found bacteria that are symbiotic on the skin of these newts that also produce a toxin. Now they say that it's not completely the bacteria, but it may be that the ones that are more toxic are the ones that have that bacteria on their skin. I grew up with these in my home in Oklahoma. And I apparently nearly gave my grandmother a heart attack when I was like 2 or 3. I actually came in the house and I had draped one over my mouth, like a little mustachio. And and maybe that's why I am the way I am today. Maybe that's why I'm a scientist, because things like that. Another cool story is due to predation changing, or I should say selecting for. So this is another example of that situation. So these guys are visual predators. I just picked a beautiful hawk because I like the photo. But these guys are called pocket mice, and usually they live in the desert, and you will see that their color matches their background. Okay? Years and years ago, in certain areas of their distribution, there was a lava flow. So lava flow turns it's dark. Okay? So the mice that happened to be born dark, they couldn't change their color. Okay? The ones that happened to be born dark now are the ones that are camouflaged from these visual predators. So over time, the population in those areas changed to be dominated by these dark-furred mice. And a final, one of my favorite examples of predator and prey relations are bats and moths. Okay, does anybody know how bats hunt? echolocation, right? So they emit certain wavelengths of sound, and it hits something and it turns back and gives them information about the size, direction of their prey item. Some moths, think way back when, were born with a mutation that allowed them to make their own sound. Okay? And this is just an example of one way. This is the rear end of a moth. And these little parts right here are little striations that they kind of rub those two parts together, and it makes their own frequency. Okay? And it can do that for a couple of reasons. One is that it's a signal. You guys know the story of the monarch butterfly, right? The monarch has a very specific color pattern, and it's poisonous, so that's a signal to the predator. In this case, the same deal. It can signal to the predator, hey, I'm poisonous. And in fact, some species of moth, just like the viceroy butterfly, use Batesian mimicry and actually make that same sound, but they're not poisonous, which is really cool. But the coolest way that this works is that some of these signals are not signals that are telling the bat something, but they're disrupting the wavelengths of the bat's sonar. So essentially the bat can't see the moth anymore, and it gets to escape. Okay? So I think that's all I had planned, and it's amazing I landed right on 12:45. So I'll open it up here. I know you guys want to take pictures of this, but what questions do you guys have for me, if any? And I'll make sure to repeat the question. Yeah?
What was the name of that newt?
The name of the newt was the rough-skinned newt.
Sometimes I don't like for things to get to touch it, no matter whether or not.
Usually it's just don't eat it. Usually that's the rule. What else? Does anybody have any other questions? Yeah.
So when it comes to like reintroduction of species and habitats, how consequential or beneficial is it when humans do such a thing, or does sometimes it get to a certain point where damage is irreversible in the environment and nature by itself cannot bounce back?
So you're talking specifically about humans impacting something and then trying to fix it?
Yeah. How consequential would that tend to be?
I mean, honestly, in any situation, we'd have to wait and see. Because I'll use, my zebra mussels as an example. They were unintentionally introduced by people. And then we tried to fix it. Now, what would have happened if we didn't try to fix it? Well, we don't know, because that's not what we did.
Right.
So unfortunately, a lot of this has to do with our human history as well, right? So I guess the answer is it all depends, and that's not a really good answer, but it's the answer that we have. There is some research into. Let me actually look at one of my papers real quickly, because there's a phrase that I want to share with you, if I can find it. I did a lot of reading to do this, so. What now? I can't think of the words. There's actually two lines of thought, and I know I'm not going to get the words right. But there's like a reintroduction versus recovery, like vein. Like, do we manage? I think it has to do with management. Do we manage the wolves when we put them there, or do we just let it happen? And I think that's depending on the ecologist you talk to,
Right.
the opinions would be different.
Yeah, because you would also mention how a lot of evolutionary things are random. So since nature isn't necessarily 100% predictable all the time. So I think I can understand kind of that human urge to have more control
Right.
in that area.
No, and I will tell you, I want to not correct myself, but clarify. The mutation part is random. The selection part has to do with the conditions an organism finds itself in. So usually, actually, we can predict those with a fair amount of accuracy. Those rock pocket mice example were from a lava flow in New Mexico, but they went to another lava flow in Arizona and found the same exact thing had happened, even though the genetic mutation would not have spread. So the mutations are random, what we're born with, but really then it's the other ecological pressures that are predictable. And I say predictable because that's, until you see it happen, that's what it is. And there's if you're interested in learning more about that, there's it's called long-term ecological research, and there's a handful of the LTER stations across the globe that will usually share data with people because they want to essentially come to these. It's so hard, right? Thinking about academia, right? You're in your master's degree program for 2 to 3 years, and your advisor has to have you publish on something. And the same thing for PhD work. And it's a very small subset of work until you go to an R1 institution and do similar research for 50 years. What else? Yeah.
So, is there any level of importance to certain animals that are reintroduced or protected? Like, I know that there are some endangered animals that are, for lack of a better word, better off, non-existent.
I don't. Let me think about that. So specifically endangered animals that we're talking about like protecting a species.
Yeah, ones that for example, I know that there are certain animals that are just they don't really bring that much of importance to the environment, but we still protect them because, I don't know, we find them cute, because I know a couple of them that are like that. We still protect pandas even though they don't even want themselves to survive.
Well, I don't know if I'd argue if I'd agree with that, because I think every organism, that's the ultimate goal, is to survive. The second goal is to reproduce. That's the story of life. But I think that if we didn't know what the role of that organism was, number one, we should figure it out, because there probably is one, and therein lies the danger in letting things go extinct, primarily due to humans' cause. Extinction is normal. Humans are making it worse. Okay? But let's say there's a South American dung beetle that produces the most toxic anti-cancer drug that has ever existed. If it goes extinct and we don't know it does that, there's always that thought process as well. Anything else? What? Oh, sorry.
So it's not necessarily a question, but the pocket mice and the hawk.
Yeah.
If you go out to the golf course, White Mountain Golf Course, you'll see a bunch of hawks out there, and you'll see pocket mice running around out there.
Oh. That sounds like fun. I don't like trapping mice. I spent too much time trapping those mice in New Mexico to ever want to do it again.
It's just pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Because you don't expect to see hawks out there with how much traffic's out there, but the small trees they plant,
yeah.
one year there was just this huge hawk, and he's bending over a tree that they just planted, just sitting on it, perched up, looking.
That's so cool. Now I need to go out and look at nature. I've been inside too much, but it's cold. Yeah, Colby.
So it's not really a question, but did you ask about the humans, how they affect endangered species and ecosystems? If you want a really good example, Wyoming used to have this thing called the black-footed ferret, but people moved into where the black-footed ferret was native, and this was back in like 4th grade, they were trying to reintroduce it, so I don't remember. If you want to know about human impacts on black-footed ferret and a predator being eliminated, look up a black-footed ferret, because they found more prairie dogs in people's gardens and more diseases being transferred to like pets, because prairie dogs are rodents, and the black-footed ferret was like, it's they call it a keystone species.
Exactly.
So it's crucial to how that environment works.
No, she's absolutely right. And I do believe it's still on the endangered species list.
Yeah, last I remember there was a video of rehabilitation, and it basically looks like a house ferret, except they're extremely dark, where your ferret has like the mask, and yeah, it's something to look up, because it's also a Wyoming example, and you're more apt to learn about things when like next one.
Maybe we'll do endangered species next time, Stacey. I don't know. I'm getting all these good ideas, which is exactly what happened last fall.
I like animals.
Good. I like plants. I think maybe we should talk about plants. Yeah.
Would you consider like the pine beetle predator to?
I honestly would have to say yes, but I know there's like an old school definition of predator that says the predator must consume like in its entirety. So I don't know if I can accurately say that I would consider pine beetle a predator of the pine tree. It's definitely, oh, that's so tough.
So in the Uintas, haven't you, I don't know if you've been up there, all the kill that from the pine beetles?
No, exactly, and that's what I'm thinking.
And I guess, I don't know, maybe, I would say yes and no if it is not taken care of properly, I guess, right?
Oh yeah, well, they're invasive. They're not supposed to be here, those pine bark beetles. I think they're Asian longhorn beetles.
Yeah.
I think so. But I mean, if you're talking about damage, then yeah. I mean, they're consuming that organism, at the very least, part of it.
Like full forests or.
Right. That's not one organism. You know what I mean?
Oh,
like
yeah,
it's
yeah.
as a species.
Okay.
But I think there are lines of thought that do consider consumers, primary consumers, predators of plants, parasites, predators of their hosts. I think it all depends on, what textbook definition you're looking at. But I think that absolutely that's a great example. Anything else? Okay, I got 3 minutes to get to class.